Hi, today we're going to be learning about patterns that have a constant difference. First, I want to just quickly remind you about the terminology that you need to know when working with patterns. So first we've got the term number, or n. This is the position of the term in the pattern. Okay. Then next we've got the actual term, which is tn. That is the value of the term in a particular position. And if you're working with a particular position, then you're going to replace the n in tn by whatever the term number is for that position. So if it's the first term, then it's t1. If it's the second term, then it's t2, and so on. Okay. The next thing we have is the rule. The rule is a formula that shows how the term relates to the term number. And it shows us how to find the nth term. And it's written in the form tn equals, and then you'll have a formula or an equation over here that you can substitute the term number into to work out what the term value is. Okay. Patterns can be represented in a number of different ways. Okay, so let's have a look at this example of a pattern over here. We've got 4, 7, 10, and it continues. Now this pattern can be represented in different ways. First of all, it can be represented as a sequence, like I already showed you, 4, 7, 10, where you just got the numbers listed. It can also be represented in the form of a table. So like this over here, we've got in our table n, that is the term number. So you see is 1, 2, 3. And then over here, tn is the term value. So the first term, where n is 1, is 4. The second term, where n is 2, is 7. The third term, where n is 3, is 10. Okay, so that is representing a pattern in the form of a table. A pattern can also be represented physically or diagrammatically as a geometric pattern. So it could look something like this. So over here I've got structure 1. This is representing the first term of our pattern, so that is 4 matches for the 4 in our pattern. Then I've got structure 2, which is the second term in our pattern, so that has got 7 matches for the 7 in our pattern. And then structure 3 is the third term in our pattern, so it's got 10 matches for the 10 in our pattern. So a pattern can also be represented physically using actual physical matches, or it can be represented diagrammatically like I'm showing you over here with pictures. Okay. Then it can also be represented algebraically, which is the rule. So that would be something like this. So you have tn equals 3n plus 1. So here you've got tn. That is going to be the term value for a particular n value. If you haven't put in an n value, then it's just n. But if you put in an n value, so if you're trying to work out the value of the 10th term, then you'll replace the n over here with 10, and this will be t10. So t10 is equal to 3 times 10 plus 1, and so on. So you can use the rule to help you to work out what the value of a particular term is, or you can use the rule to help you to work out the position of a term in a pattern. Okay. Right, now let's have a look at what we mean by a constant difference. Okay, so a constant difference is when you have a pattern that is increasing or decreasing by a constant amount. So for example, we've got a pattern over here, 3, 6, 9, 12. Okay, so in this pattern, if you go from the first term to the second term, it is increasing by 3. If you go from the second term to the third term, it is also increasing by 3. From the third term to the fourth term, it is also increasing by 3. So this is a constant difference. Remember, difference means subtraction. So we're working these out by taking the one term and subtracting the term before it. So that's what we mean by a constant difference. By taking one term and subtracting the term before it, we find out what the difference is. And if we get the same thing every time we do that, it's a constant difference. So in this example over here, we have a constant difference of 3. Here's another example where the pattern is 9, 7, 5, 3. So in this case, the pattern is decreasing. So in this one, 3, 6, 9, 12, the pattern was increasing. Here the pattern is decreasing. So if you go from the first term to the second term, it is going down by 2. From the second term to the third term, again, it is going down by 2. From the third term to the fourth term, it is also going down by 2. So in this one, we've got a constant difference of -2. So when your pattern is increasing, so when the numbers are getting bigger and bigger and bigger, then you have a positive constant difference. When the pattern is decreasing like this, then you've got a negative constant difference. Okay, now let's have a look at our first example. In this example, you've been given the pattern 9, 3, -3, -9. We have some questions we're going to have to answer for this one. So the first question is we need to write down the next 3 terms in the pattern. So let's have a look at what is happening in this pattern. So here I've got from 9 to 3, it is decreasing by 6. Then from 3 to negative 3, it is decreasing by 6 again. From negative 3 to negative 9, it is decreasing by 6 again. So we're going to have to carry on doing that. So from negative 9, we need to subtract 6 to get the next term. That will give us negative 15. Then from negative 15, I need to do the same thing again. So I need to subtract 6. That will give me negative 21. And then finally, from negative 21, I subtract 6 to get negative 27. Okay, so that's what the next 3 terms would look like for this particular pattern. Okay, the next question is we need to describe the pattern in words. Now, there are a few different ways that you can approach this particular kind of question. You can first approach it by looking at how you are counting in the pattern. So you can say that you're counting, what direction you're counting in, what the interval is, and what the starting point is. So in this case over here, we're counting backwards. That's why it's going down. So we're counting backwards in 6s because it is a constant difference of 6. So the 6s is telling us what the constant difference is. So we're counting backwards in 6s. And then we have to say what the starting point is, because otherwise, if we don't, the assumption would be that we're counting backwards in 6s and it would be going negative 6, negative 12, negative 18, negative 24, and so on. But it's not. In this case, it's going 9, 3, negative 3, negative 9. So we have to say where we are starting. Otherwise, this description doesn't actually tell us about this particular pattern. Okay, so that's one way of describing the pattern in words. So talk about how you're counting. The next way is to talk about how you get from the one term to the next term in the pattern. And so if you look at this over here, you would get from the first term to the second term by subtracting 6. And the same thing from the second term to the third term by subtracting 6, and so on. So you talk about how you get from the one term to the next term, and in this case we are subtracting 6 to get from each term to the next term. And then you also have to say where you're starting from. So just like we did over here, you have to say where you're starting from. So we're starting from 9. Otherwise, just saying that you're subtracting 6 from each term to get the next term doesn't actually tell you enough to be able to see what the pattern would be. And then the last way of describing the pattern would be to talk about the relationship between the term number and the term value. So over here, this term is the first term, so the term number is 1. Here the term number is 2, here the term number is 3, the term number is 4. This way of describing it is actually very closely related to the rule, which we are still going to learn about how to actually work out the rule. But just let me show you how you can describe it like this. So if you take the term number and you multiply it by negative 6, and then you increase it by 15, it will give you the term value. So if we take the term number 1 and we multiply by negative 6, that'll give us negative 6, and then we add 15, that will give us the 9 that we've got over here. Okay, the same thing over here. If I take the term number, which is 2, multiply it by negative 6, that gives me negative 12, and then I add 15, that gives me 3. So this method of describing the pattern in words is to basically tell what the rule is, just in a language form. Okay, but we're still going to learn about how to actually work out that rule. Okay, so now let's go on to question C, which is to actually work out what the nth term is. And the nth term is the same as the rule. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to do that over here. So I've got my pattern, 9, 3, negative 3, negative 9. Now, like I said, we are going down in 6s. If you go from the 9 to the 3, you are subtracting 6. If you go from the 3 to the negative 3, you are subtracting 6. If you go from 3 to negative 3 to negative 9, you are again subtracting 6. So we have a constant difference of negative 6. Now, when you have a pattern with a constant difference, now not all patterns have a constant difference, but the ones we're doing in this lesson do have constant differences. When you have a pattern that has a constant difference, then your rule is going to start off by taking that constant difference and multiplying it by n. So it's going to be negative 6 times n, or negative 6n. Okay, so the constant difference is going to be multiplied by n. But now, if we take just this rule, Tn equals negative 6n, and we write down what that pattern looks like. If n is 1, then it's negative 6 times 1 is negative 6. So my first term would be negative 6. If n is 2, I have negative 6 times 2, which is negative 12. So my second term would be negative 12. If n is 3, I have negative 6 times 3, that's negative 18. If n is 4, I have negative 6 times 4, which is negative 24, and so on. Okay, so this is what my pattern would look like for this rule. So now, obviously, you can see that that is not the same as what we've got. We have got a pattern that says 9, 3, negative 9. The rule, or the pattern for the rule negative 6n, is negative 6, negative 12, negative 18, negative 24. So they're not the same. So now we have to see, how do we get from this to that? Because that is, I now know that this is part of my rule. It's negative 6n, because I do have a constant difference of negative 6, okay? Just like I have over here. But this is not the same as that pattern. So I have to adjust my rule to make it the same as this. Okay, so now I have to see, how do I get from there to there? How do I get from negative 6 to 9? How do I get from negative 12 to 3? How do I get from negative 18 to negative 3? So now we're going to be looking at, what do we add or subtract to get from that to that? So to get from negative 6 to 9, if I add 15, I will get 9. To get from negative 12, if I add 15 as well, I will get 3. If I add 15 to negative 18, I will get negative 3. If I add 15 to negative 24, I will get negative 9. So over here, if I take this rule, which gives me that pattern, and I add 15 to it, it will give me this pattern. So now let's go and check it. If I have negative 6 times, if this term over here is the first term, and the second term, and the third term, and the fourth term. So here n is 1. So if I have negative 6 times 1, that's negative 6, plus 15 is 9. Negative 6 times 2 is negative 12, plus 15 gives me 3. Negative 6 times 3 is negative 18, plus 15 is negative 3. Negative 6 times 4 is negative 24, plus 15 is negative 9. So over here, I now have the rule for this particular pattern, that Tn is equal to negative 6n plus 15. Now, when you're working this out, you don't need to necessarily write this whole thing down over here. You can look at your difference over here, and then you can say, well, the first term, because I would be multiplying, in this case it was negative 6, by 1 for the first term, it's the same as what the difference is. So this over here, I can just look, without having to write that, I can just look over here and I can say, if I just had negative 6n, my first term of that pattern would be negative 6. It's the same as my common difference or constant difference that I have over here. So how do I get from that negative 6 to the 9? I need to add 15. So you can just look, without having to write down an extra pattern over here, you can just go and look at, see, how do you get from the constant difference to the first term? And that will tell you what you need to add or subtract over here. So you first find what you multiply n by working out your constant difference. And then you take that constant difference and you see, what do you need to do to that to get your first term? And that's what you're going to add or subtract over here. Okay, so now let's go on to question D. Okay, so over here at question C, we had Tn is equal to negative 6n plus 15. Then question D, we need to determine the 12th term in the pattern. Now to determine the 12th term, we're going to use the rule that we just worked out. So Tn is equal to negative 6n plus 15. And now the 12th term is where n is 12. So I'm going to replace the n over here with 12 and the n over here with 12. And that gives me T12 is equal to negative 6 times 12 plus 15. If we simplify that, negative 6 times 12 is negative 72, plus 15 gives us negative 57. So the 12th term is equal to negative 57. Okay, and the question E, the last one for this example, is we need to determine which term in the pattern equals negative 105. Okay, so now we're going to be substituting here. They've given us the value of the term. So we're going to be using our rule again, but this time we're not substituting in an n value because we haven't been told the position. We need to work out the position, okay? We need to work out where the term is, which term is equal to negative 105. So over here, the negative 105 is going to go on this side in place of the tn, and we need to work out what n is to work out which term is equal to negative 105. So we're going to solve over here for n. Okay, so to solve for n, I need to get rid of the 15 on this side. I want to get it away from that n. So I'm going to subtract 15 on both sides, and that gives me over here negative 120 equal to negative 6n. Now to get the n on its own, I'm going to divide by negative 6 on both sides, and that gives me 20. So that means that n is equal to 20. Now what that means is that t20 is negative 105, or I could also say that the 20th term is negative 105. Okay, so that's our first example, where we've got a pattern that's been written as a sequence. So now let's go on to our next question. In this question, you've been given a pattern in the form of a table. So you can see over here, you've got the n value. So this is 1, 2, 3, 10. We're going to have to work this n value out, and then n. And over here, we've got tn. This is the term value. So that this is what the actual value is for the term for these different n values. So over here, the first term is negative 2. The second term is 2. The third term is 6. So now let's have a look at what we actually have to do for this question. We have to work out the missing values for the blocks labeled A to C in this table. So first we have to work out A over here, which is in this block where the value above is just n. So that means we need to work out what the rule is for this pattern over here. Okay, so let's have a look at how we would do this question. Okay, so over here, I've just written down the first 3 terms of this pattern based on what was in the table. Okay, just so that we can look at the constant difference and so on. So if I look from negative 2 to 2, how I get from negative 2 to 2 is I add 4. And from 2 to 6, I'm going to again add 4. So I've got a constant difference of 4. So far, I know that my rule is going to be Tn is equal to positive 4n. I multiply n by positive 4. Okay, but now if I had a rule or if I had a pattern for the rule Tn equals 4n, the pattern would go 4, 8, 12, 16. It would be counting in 4s. But that's not what this pattern looks like. I don't have a pattern that goes 4, 8, 12. I've got a pattern that goes negative 2, 2, 6. So I need to see how do I get from the 4 to the negative 2, because my first term of that pattern would be 4, but it's not, it's negative 2. So how do I get from 4 to negative 2? I need to subtract 6. So over here, I'm going to subtract 6. So now that means that my rule is going to be 4n minus 6. So over here, the first thing I need to work out for A is the rule, and that is 4n minus 6. Okay, now let's go on to B. So B is the value where n is 10. So it's our 10th term. So I'm looking for T10. Okay, so for T10, I have 4 times 10 minus 6. So using that same rule that I got for A, I'm now able to go and work out the value of the 10th term. So over here, I have 4 times 10 is 40 minus 6, and that gives us 34. So our 10th term, or the value of the term where n is 10, is going to be 34. And then the last one that we have to do for this example, we have to work out for question C. So this was A, this is B. Now we're doing question C. We need to work out the n value if Tn is 58. So over here, again, using that same formula, Tn equals 4n minus 6. If n of Tn is 58, I have 58 equals 4n minus 6. Now I need to go and work out what n is. So to work out n, I'm going to take the 6, I'm going to get rid of it here by adding 6 on both sides. So that gives me 64 equals 4n. Then I need to divide by 4 to get what n is equal to. So 64 divided by 4 is going to be 16. So that means that the 16th term, T16, is equal to 58. So over here, I can say in my table that if n is 16, then Tn is 58. Okay, now let's go on to the next example. In this example, you've been given a pattern that is being represented diagrammatically. So we've got a pattern that has been built with matches. You can see over here we've got the first structure. Okay, it has got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 matches altogether. The second structure has the same 8, and then we've added on that one, that one, that one, that one, and that one. So we've added on 5 extra matches over there. Then the third structure is the same as the second one, but again, we've added on 5 more matches again. Okay, now we have to go and answer some questions. The first question is that we need to draw the fourth structure. Okay, so the fourth structure is going to be the same as the third structure, but we're going to add on those 5 matches on the end again. So that's going to look like this. So we've got, this is what we had for the first structure, then we added on these 5 to get the second one, we added on these 5 to get the third one, now we added on these 5 over here to get the fourth structure. Okay, so that's what your fourth structure would look like. The second question is we need to complete this table. We first need to fill in A, B, C, and D, which are the number of matches in the first 4 structures. So here you can just use what you can see in the diagrams. So for A, the number of matches is going to be 8. And then for B, the number of matches is going to be 13 because we added an extra 5. For C, the number of matches is going to be 18. And then for D, the number of matches is 23 based on the structure that we drew. Okay, now we need to go and work out E, F, and G. Now the reason E has been put first is because it'll help us to work out what F and G are if we know what the rule is. Okay, so let's go and have a look at how we would work out the rule. Okay, so here I have written the pattern as a sequence using the number of matches in each structure as the terms in my pattern. Okay, so let's have a look at what our differences are going to be. So from 8 to 13, we need to add 5. From 13 to 18, we are adding 5. From 18 to 23, we are adding 5. And if you think about it, that makes sense because with the structures, we were adding 5 matches every time. Okay, so now let's go and have a look at what our rule looks like. If my constant difference is 5, then we're going to have Tn equals 5n. I multiply n by that constant difference. So Tn is equal to 5n. Now I need to go and work out what the rest of the rule is because that's not the whole rule. Because if the whole rule was 5n, my pattern would be 5, 10, 15, 20. But it's not. It's 8, 13, 18, 23. So now let's see, how do we get from 5, 10, 15, 20 to 8, 13, 18, 23? So if my first term would be 5 and my first term here is 8, I need to add 3 to get that 8. So I'm going to be adding 3 over here. So my term rule is going to be 5n plus 3. And you can check it for all of the terms. If you have the second term, then if n is 2, you have 5 times 2 is 10 plus 3 gives us that 13 and so on. Okay, so our rule is going to be 5n plus 3. Okay, now let's go on to F. Now for F, we've been given the structure number 10. Structure number is the same as the n value. So in my rule, I've got T10 now equals 5 times 10 plus 3. So I'm substituting in 10 because I want to work out how many matches there are in the 10th structure. Okay, so I'm going to go and work that out. So that's 50 plus 3 gives me 53. So the number of matches in the 10th structure is going to be 53. And then for question G, we need to go and work out which structure will have 118 matches in it. So this is where we're going to be putting our 118 in place of Tn. So it's 118 is equal to 5n plus 3. Now we're going to go and solve for n. So to work out what n is, I'm going to subtract 3 on both sides. That gives me 115 equal to 5n. And now I need to go and divide by 5 on both sides, and that gives us 23. So therefore, n is equal to 23. Okay, and that is how you would do that question. Now we're going to go on to something that you're going to do for yourself. The first one you're going to do, you've been given the pattern -4, -6, -8, -10. You need to write down the next 3 terms. You need to describe the pattern in words. You need to find the rule for this pattern. You need to determine the 9th term in the pattern. And you need to determine which term in the pattern equals -36. I'm going to give you 2 minutes to work on this question. Okay, so let's go through that question and see what you should have got. Okay, so here I've got my pattern. So the first question, we have to work out what the next 3 terms are going to be in this pattern. So first I need to go and see what is happening in the pattern. So in this pattern, I'm going from -4 to -6. That is decreasing by 2. -6 to -8 again is decreasing by 2. -8 to -10 is also decreasing by 2. So I need to continue doing that for the next 3 terms. So I'm going to decrease by 2 again. That's going to give me -12. Then I subtract 2 again. That gives me -14. And again, and it gives me -16. So my next 3 terms should be -12, -14, and -16. Right, then question B, you had to describe the pattern in words. Now remember, there are 3 ways that you could go about doing this. So I'm going to choose to use the counting method. It's not the only option. So I'm describing this as counting backwards. Okay, so I say what the direction is. It's backwards. And then the interval is in 2s because the constant difference was 2. Okay, it's -2. That's why it's backwards. So it's counting backwards in 2s. And then I have to say what the starting point is. So it's from -4. Okay, so when you are describing a pattern in words, this is one way of doing it, by saying how you're counting. You're counting backwards in 2s from -4. You could also describe how you get from the one term to the next by saying that we subtract 2 from each term to get the next term, again starting from -4. Okay, so that's the other way of doing it. And then you can also talk about the relationship between the term number and the term, which is basically saying the rule in word form. Okay, then question C, we had to work out what the rule for this pattern was. Now when they ask you to work out the rule, it's the same as asking you to find the nth term. It's the same as asking you to find Tn. They all mean the same thing. They all want you to find the rule for the pattern. Okay, so I'm working out what Tn is, which is the rule. Okay, so now in this one, I've already worked out that my constant difference is -2, so it's going to be -2n, because I take my constant difference and I multiply it by n. Then once I've got that, I then need to see what must I do to that to get the first term. So -2, and what do I do to get to -4? I need to subtract another 2. So it's -2n minus 2, because if it was just -2n, the pattern would be -2, -4, -6. But it's not. It's -4, -6, -8. So I have to subtract 2 to change each of those terms to be the same as this pattern over here. Okay, so my rule is Tn equals -2n minus 2. Then question D, you've been asked to work out the 9th term in the pattern. So now we need to work out what T9 is equal to. That is where n is 9. Okay, so I'm going to go and multiply -2 by 9 is -18 minus 2. That gives us -20. So the 9th term is equal to -20. And then for question E, we need to work out which term in the pattern equals -36. Okay, so we have -36 in place of Tn, and we have to work out what n is. So -2n minus 2. So I need to get rid of the -2 over here by adding 2 on both sides. That's going to give me -34 equals -2n. And then I'm going to divide by -2. That gives me n equals 17. So the 17th term is equal to -36. And that's what you should get for that question. Okay, right. Now we're going to go on to the next example, the next question. Here you've been given a pattern in the form of a table, and you need to fill in the missing values in this table. I'm going to give you 2 minutes for this question as well. Okay, so let's go through that and see what you should have got. Okay, so here I've written my pattern as a sequence using the values from the table. I'm going to start off by finding out what the rule is, okay, because that's going to help me to work out the other two missing values as well. So I'm using these first four values that they gave me to work out what the rule is. So over here, the difference from 1 to -3, I have to subtract 4. From -3 to -7, I have to subtract 4 as well. From -7 to -11, I have to subtract 4 as well. Okay, so here I've got a constant difference of -4. So that's going to be Tn equals -4n. So I take that constant difference and I multiply it by n. But if my rule was just -4n, then my pattern would be -4, -8, -12, -16, and so on. And it's not. It's 1, -3, -7, -11. So how do I get from the -4 to the 1? I need to add 5. So my rule is -4n plus 5. So that we should have got for the rule. Okay. Then we're going to use that rule to help us to work out what the term value is where n is 15. So now I'm going to be working out T15, and that is where n is 15. Okay, so now I'm going to go and work this out. So -4 times 15 is -60 plus 5. That gives us -55. So if n is 15, then Tn is going to be -55. Okay, and then the last one you had to do was where the term value is -71, and we had to work out what n was. So that's going to be -71 equals -4n plus 5, and we need to go and work out n. So we're going to get rid of the 5 over here by subtracting 5 on both sides. That's going to give us -76 equals -4n. Then we're to divide by 4 on both sides, and that should give you 19. So therefore, n is equal to 19. So that's what we should have got for that value over there, that n is 19. Okay, now let's go on to the last question for today. So in the last activity, you've been given a pattern that's been given to you in diagrammatic form, okay, where you've got these lines over here that are forming a pattern. You need to draw the next structure, and you need to complete the table based on the pattern that you've been given. I'm going to give you 2 minutes for this activity as well. Okay, so let's go through that example. So the first thing we need to do is we need to draw what the next structure looks like. So the first structure started off with 5 vertical lines. Then for the next structure, they added on 5 horizontal lines and 5 more vertical lines. Then for the third structure, they did the same thing, adding on 5 horizontal lines and 5 vertical lines. And then for the fourth structure, we're going to have to do the same thing again, adding on 5 horizontal lines and 5 vertical lines. So that is what your structure should look like. Okay, now let's have a look at the table that we need to fill in. Okay, so for the table, we need to fill in the number of lines in the first, second, third, fourth, and 18th structures. We also need to work out which structure has 245 lines, and we need to work out what the rule is. Okay, so we're going to start off by doing the first 4, which are just using what they gave us and the structure that we just drew. Okay, so for the first one, the first structure had 5 lines in it. Okay, so we're going to start off with 5. I'm just writing it here as well, so I'll be able to use this for working out my rule. Then the second structure had 15 lines. The third structure had 25 lines. And the fourth structure had 35 lines. So those values just came from the diagrams that they gave you and the structure that you drew as well. Okay, now for the next thing we're going to work out, I'm going to go on to the rule. And the reason I'm going to go on to the rule is because it's going to help me to work out the number of lines in the 18th structure and which structure has 245 lines. Okay, so for the rule, we are working out Tn. Okay, that is the number of lines in the nth structure. Okay, so this is going to be Tn equals, and now I need to work out what my rule is. So I need to know what is happening in this pattern. So I look and see from the first term to the second term, it is increasing by 10. From the second term to the third term, it is also increasing by 10. From the third term to the fourth term, it is also increasing by 10. So I've got a constant difference of 10. So Tn is equal to 10n. I'm multiplying n by 10. Then, if it was just 10n, the pattern would be 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, but it's not. It's 5, 15, 25, 35. So I need to see what I need to do to get this pattern. So to get from 10 to 5, I need to subtract 5. So over here it's going to be minus 5. That will give me this pattern, 5, 15, 25, 35. Okay, so that's what my rule looks like. So that's what you should have got for n, or for the Tn value where the structure number was n. The next one you had to do was to work out how many lines there are in the 18th structure. So here we're going to be working out what T18 is. So that's going to be 10 times 18 minus 5. Okay, so 10 times 18 is 180, minus 5 gives us 175. Okay, so that's what we should get for that one. So there are 175 lines in the 18th structure. And then the last one we're going to do is working out which structure is equal to 245. So that's going to be 245 equals 10n minus 5, and we need to work out what n is. So I'm going to take this 5, get rid of it by adding 5 on both sides. So this is going to be 250 equals 10n. Now I need to divide by 10. That means that n is equal to 25. So you should have got 25 over here. And that is how we do patterns that have a constant difference. Now that we've learned the concepts in this lesson, it's important to practice, practice, practice. If you haven't already got the worksheet that goes with this video, you can find it by clicking on the link in the description below. The worksheet comes with an extra exercise full of questions for you to work on to master the concepts covered in this lesson. If you found this video helpful, please hit the like button so that others can benefit from it too. Also, be sure to subscribe so that you can easily find my other lessons, and hit the bell so that you will get notified about lessons as I upload them.